All right, well, stop me if you've heard this one before. A group of people want to stop supporting funding and weaponization of Ukraine. They want to stop funding the deaths of 1 million people, and the media calling them right-wing extremists, ultra-nationalists. That's what's happening in Poland. The Polish people seem to be done with Ukraine. They're fed up, and they've been inundated with millions of Ukrainian refugees, Polish soldiers fighting and dying on the front lines against Russia. But anyone who's against this is far right. How did that happen? Well, I guess our next guest is then we'll call him an ultra-nationalist or an extremist because he wants peace. He wants to not die in a war with Ukraine. Dr. Mike Krupa joins us from Poland right now. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you guys again. Hello, Natalie.
Hello. Okay, so we talked just a few minutes ago about how the EU wants to punish any country that does not go along with their agenda. But there does seem to be a movement in Poland to not be dragged into this war. Poland is used as a, I'm going to speak for you, you don't speak for yourself. And so the EU keeps saying, well, Putin's coming into Poland next. The Polish people are super scared. They definitely want to push back against this. But what's the reality?
Well, the reality is that a lot of people in Poland are waking up to the reality, i.e. that this war is lost, that we have a problem in Poland as a result of the huge influx of Ukrainian refugees, or in many cases, so-called refugees that enter Poland after the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine. And so we're seeing public opinion has definitely been turning against the dominant, still unfortunately, media and political narrative that first Ukrainians or Poland are saving the Polish economy. And without this influx, this wave of millions of Ukrainian first immigrants before the war and then so-called refugees after the war, that our economy would basically crash without this Ukrainian lifeline, which is obviously BS from an economic and many other points of view also. And the second point, that Russia is just gearing up to invade Poland, and that we as Poland should prepare for a war with Russia. And the best way to do that will be to fight on the territory of Ukraine. So those are the two sets of propaganda that have been successfully sold, unfortunately, for the last 3 years. But fortunately, Polish public opinion, despite the fact that in the beginning of the war, was very much in line with what I would say, the regime wanted the population to accept as truth. Right now, we're seeing the trends are definitely turning against the regime's narrative. And you could see it in the desperation that seems to pervade the upper echelons of the Polish political class in Warsaw. We saw this funny appeal from Prime Minister Donald Tusk, I believe yesterday, where he was basically begging Trump to reconsider the tariffs and saying that in Europe, you only have friends, and Poland, we are your greatest ally. So please, Mr. President, be nice. And oh, by the way, if you can fight the war in Ukraine for us, that would also be great. So in light of that desperation, you're seeing the public opinion is changing. And hopefully, as many are predicting, this will be reflected in the upcoming presidential elections that are to take place in Poland in May.
Now, one of the more laughable things in the last few weeks has been the chest pounding of European leaders like, well, if we don't have the United States to lead this anymore, we can do it. We're going to arm ourselves. We're going to take on a bunch of debt, build a bunch of bombs. We definitely can do it. But then you look at the signal leak of the Houthi chat, and you have American intelligence saying, we have to help Europe. They can't even fight the Houthis. They can't even do that. And so does any European actually think that they have the means to win a war against Russia?
Well, I've noticed that President Macron has been trying to do a sort of Napoleon redux. He seems to think he's a sort of reincarnation of Napoleon Bonaparte for the 21st century. So he might believe some of the BS that's spouting out of Brussels and Berlin and other European capitals. But I think the majority of the population of the nation states in Europe that comprise the European Union, and the ones that are in Europe but are not part of the European Union, are not interested in any war with Russia. And they understand the deficiencies in the European economies and in the European defense sectors that really can't stand toe to toe with the Russian bear. I mean, we had news over the weekend that basically the blast furnaces, the last two blast furnaces that were producing steel in Britain, have been shut down. So what kind of war preparation are we talking about here? You constantly hear, I mean,
what they were saying to the French is, if you look at the leaked document out of the French government, is we will prepare you for armed resistance, armed militia resistance in each little tiny village. So do you think the Poles are down with that?
Well, it all depends. I think if we understand resistance to Russia in Ukraine, this would translate to what I would call terrorist tactics, because the Ukrainians are known for resisting Russians. Back then, it was the Soviets from 1945 to the early 1950s, by using basically terrorist tactics against, obviously, an occupier. But the tactics that they were using were very similar to what happened in Volhynia in the years 1943, 1945, when the Ukrainian nationalists slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Poles and, Czechs, Jews, and other national minorities. But basically, when we talk about the resistance that's to come from European nation states and the guarantees that are coming from the French that, we're going to support this entire European revival, no, it's just pure narrative. Because, I think it was Colonel McGregor today on an earlier show said that in order to build up a competent army, if you're starting to build things today and you're laying the foundations today, it takes about 10 years to actually build a force that can do the real fighting. So all we're hearing right now is basically narratives being sold on social media, which a lot of people are unfortunately buying, because you still see a lot of the Ukrainian flags on, on X and other social media. So there is a contingent of people that still buy the BS, but by the day, that contingent is falling. Like I've noticed, for example, that nobody in Poland anymore, at least not in the Polish mainstream media, wears a Ukrainian flag in their jacket, right? So you have to ask yourself, well, what changed? What changed? Well, everybody knows what changed, except they're just, they're too dishonest to admit it.
Right. But what of the Polish people who were told, you are making sacrifices for the war in Ukraine? Your crops will not be sold. Ukrainian crops will be prioritized. We will not export your goods any longer. You will take these refugees, and your taxes and your taxes will rise and the euro will plummet. And all of that was based on a lie, and it was putting the Polish people last. And is there any repercussion for what they've done?
Well, the repercussions, unfortunately, are only seen in the frustration of the Polish populace. Now, a lot of people are hoping that the upcoming presidential elections will be a sort of a middle finger of the Polish nation to the establishment. We'll see how that goes, because basically right now, the favorite, unfortunately, is one Rafał Trzaskowski, who is the current mayor of Warsaw. He's basically a protege of Barack Obama, George Soros, and that entire crew of people. But there are certain sort of, I would call them dissident anti-establishment candidates, including Grzegorz Braun, whom Clayton had the opportunity to interview, I think, over a year ago, and one Sławomir Mencen, who is also in the running from the Confederation Party. Now, despite the fact that they have their differences, they are united in their opposition to any Polish participation in the proxy war against Russia, which is a big plus. And the second, they're actually seeing that there is a concerted effort to transform Poland, if not into a multicultural state, but at least into a bicultural state, where we have Poles and Ukrainians living side by side, and where the entity, the national, the pillars of the national state are becoming more and more Ukrainianized, in the sense that, you're seeing more and more billboards in Ukrainian, you're hearing Ukrainian on the street. And, some are speculating that it's just a matter of time before we see Ukrainian political parties in Poland. We already have Ukrainian trade unions, for example. So that term that was used by Grzegorz Braun a couple of years ago, Ukrainianization of Poland, is becoming a fact, and people are waking up to that. And we are asking serious questions about reforming our immigration system and, for example, implementing something along the lines of a immigration moratorium. So these two candidates, Mencen and Grzegorz Braun, are actually discussing this. Mencen is having fairly good poll numbers as of today. We'll see how that turns out. Grzegorz Braun is around the 3-4% margin. But one way or another, the message that there's something seriously wrong with internal Polish politics, that's an extension of what we do externally, i.e. in Ukraine, is resonating with more and more Poles. So there's a lot of hope in Poland at this stage that something will happen in the first round of elections in May.
Can you explain that to me? I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with having a workers' union that represents immigrants from Ukraine, but is it exporting Ukrainian politics, which are corrupt, into Poland?
Oh, yeah. Well, the problem with, the whole massive immigration issue in Poland, because we like to talk about, it's just like in the States, right? I mean, it's easy to bash the illegal immigrants and the dynamics of illegal immigration. Everybody sees that. It's wrong to cross the border and to basically invade a country. But when you have massive legal immigration of the likes that we've had in Poland in the last 3, 4, 5 years, especially when it comes to Ukrainians, of which there are about just north of 3, some even speculate around 4 million. Add to that a couple of 100,000 Georgians, Belarusians, and people coming in from other continents to Poland. You're not only seeing, wage depression in the labor market. That's a whole different issue. But you're also seeing issues where we have seen significant rise in crime committed by foreigners in Poland. This is being talked about more and more by the police in Poland, who are being frustrated that they're not able to have the capacity in the capital within their ranks to actually battle this plague, which is becoming more and more apparent every day. I mean, the latest news about so-called Russian spies in Poland that were conducting some sort of sabotage and diversion operations. They were accused of being Russian spies, but each of these so-called spies had Ukrainian passports. So you're opening the gates to national security threats also. Plus the fact that a lot of these Ukrainians that come to Poland, as you mentioned, they bring along with them their Banderite nationalist ideology, and nobody dares to point that out, unfortunately. And a lot of them are acting as if, they own this country. And a lot of Poles are being fed up with that because they're coming here. Not only are they living off the social grants that many of them are getting from the government, but a lot of them are acting as if, they deserve some sort of special treatment. And when you walk down a Warsaw Street, for example, and you're seeing a Lamborghini or a brand new Mercedes or a Tesla riding on a Ukrainian license plate, you have to ask yourself the question, what kind of refugees and immigrants are actually coming to Poland?
Oh, yes. I saw that in Lisbon, Teslas and all kinds of things like that with Ukrainian plates. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, good point. Thank you for making that distinction. But all of this can only happen if Poland is sovereign. Now, the new German chancellor has said that he is interested in creating laws to punish Viktor Orban from trying to protect his country from the exact things you just dictated. So a new leadership in Poland would still be beholden to whatever the EU wants. So could they even implement an agenda like this to put the Polish people first while still a part of the EU?
Well, let's just say hypothetically that an anti-establishment candidate becomes president after the second round of Polish elections in May. Unfortunately, the institute of the presidency in Poland is it's mostly a unique, a symbolic institution, because the president is the commander-in-chief of the army. He can initiate legislation, but that could obviously be struck down with the proper amount majority in parliament. And he's mostly a symbolic figure as the head of state. However, because of the power and the symbolism of his office, he can generate sort of political dynamics that can influence, for example, the creation of a new political party, or he can influence some things that are happening in parliament, right? Especially if he has a strong mandate from the people. But if we were to see change on a scale that we're discussing here, which would definitely be associated with regaining the sovereignty that we lost ever since 2004, actually, when, as some people say, not Poland entered the European Union, but rather the European Union entered Poland, then we would definitely have to look towards something of either a new treaty with the European Union, which is highly unlikely, a sovereigntist treaty, or a Pole exit, basically. Or if you have the guts, as Viktor Orban and Robert Fico does, you fight for what you can within the confines of the European Union, and you use your veto power that you have at the highest levels of decision-making in Brussels. Unfortunately, nobody in Poland dares to take that kind of action, because the current ruling regime believes that if you say no to the European Union, you're automatically saying yes to Putin. Therefore, that makes you a Russian agent. Therefore, that makes you the scum of the earth. And we will obviously not engage in that. So that's the dichotomy that we have. But I agree with you that if we were to undertake major pro-Polish, Poland first type changes in Poland, it would probably require, first and foremost, a saying au revoir to Brussels.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, then you don't have anyone who wants to take on the labels of extremists or far right or whatever. Viktor Orban doesn't seem to care. Doesn't seem to bother him what the media calls him. But I guess there's no politician in Poland who wants that right now. And who
Unfortunately,
would,
no politician
right?
in Poland that's in power right now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to blame anyone for not wanting to take that, but okay, we'll leave it there. Dr. Mike Krupa joining me from Warsaw, Poland, where it's late there. Thank you for staying up late to be on Redacted. It's always a pleasure to get your opinion and your perspective on this.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one. See you soon.